Tashidele and welcome to Tibet this week, where we bring you weekly news edition on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's have a look at today's headlines. Sikyong congratulates the US President-elect Donald Trump. Sikyong congratulates Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Jim McGovern on their re-election to the US House of Representatives. Tibetan Parliamentary Delegation begins Tibet Advocacy in Baltic states. Rivers of the Sky exhibition highlights mismanagement of Tibet's vulnerable river system ahead of COP29. 10th Young Tibetan Researchers Conference held at Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies in Varanasi. Tibetan delegates highlight Delegate concerns on first day of COP29 UN Climate Summit. 2024 Asian Buddhist Summit focuses on strengthening Asia through Buddhism. Tibet Information Office participates in seminar hosted by Chinese Alliance for Democracy. Sikyong wrote a letter to the US President-elect, His Excellency Donald Trump, to express his heartfelt congratulations to the latter on being elected as the 47th President of the US on behalf of the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibetan people. Sikyong highlighted the critical role of the United States leadership in addressing global challenges and thanked America for its long-standing bipartisan support for Tibet. He expressed hope for continued collaboration under Trump's leadership to strengthen Tibet-US relations. Sikyong also extended heartfelt congratulations to both Congressman Jim McGovern and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi on their re-election to the U.S. House of Representatives on behalf of the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibetan people. In his letters, Sikyong highlighted their unwavering commitment to human rights and democracy with special gratitude for their advocacy for Tibet. To Congressman Jim McGovern, Sikyong praised his consistent efforts to hold China accountable for human rights abuses and his support for Tibetan religious freedom and cultural preservation. To Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, he expressed appreciation for her deep bond with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and her steadfast leadership on Tibetan rights in Congress. Both letters emphasized the invaluable support of these leaders for their Tibetan cause and the hope for continued collaboration to advance human dignity and freedom for Tibet and other oppressed communities worldwide. During his recent visits to Tibetan communities in Siliguri and Kalimpong, Sikyong addressed key issues facing Tibetans. At the Segu Institute, he reiterated the Central Tibetan Administration's commitment to middle-way approach, highlighting global shifts, the significance of U.S. legislation supporting Tibet, and China's intensified cultural suppression, particularly through state-run boarding schools. He urged Tibetans to study their history to preserve their identity, recommending works by scholars like Professor Michael van Walt Prague. In Kalimpong, Sikyong visited Tibetan institutions and spoke to students on Tibet's geopolitical significance and environmental concerns. He highlighted His Holiness the Dalai Lama's pivotal role in developing the middle way approach, promoting Sino-Tibetan dialogue and establishing Tibetan communities in exile with support from India. Emphasizing unity with other oppressed communities, he encouraged Tibetans to stay informed and engaged globally to strengthen their cause, while stressing that understanding their history is crucial to preserving their cultural legacy. On November 8 to 11, Sikyong visited Tibetan institutions and met with the Tibetan community in Kalimpong and Sikkim. He paid respects at major Buddhist monasteries and met with local leaders, including Sikkim's Chief Minister Prem Singh Tamangole and Speaker Khemposnam Temple at the inauguration of Mintuling Tsangtopari Temple in Tumlang, North Sikkim. On Tuesday this week, upon arriving in Lisbon, Portugal, Sikyong received a warm welcome from Representative Rinzai Churing Gengang and Alexander Correa of Grupo de Agapeo, Tibet. His engagements in Portugal included interviews with media outlets Lusa and Expresso, a meeting with Professor Paulo Moraes, and discussions with Portuguese MPs on the Tibet's geopolitical significance and His Holiness the Dalai Lama's reincarnation issue. He urged MPs to adopt a position akin to the US stance on Tibet. A Tibetan Parliamentary delegation, including MPs Geshe-Laramba Golopsan-Pende and Wangdu Doji, is visiting Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia from November 10 to 16. On November 10, they launched their campaign in Vilnius with a breakfast meeting with Dainius Zalimas, members of European Parliament and former president of Lithuania's Constitutional Court. The MPs raised concerns about China's repression of Tibetan religious freedom and the sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism and culture, presenting Zalimas with an appeal letter from the Tibetan Parliament in exile. On Tuesday this week, Tibetan parliamentarians met with Lithuanian MP in Vilnius, including members of the Parliamentary Group for Relations with Tibet. They discussed the critical situation in Tibet and urged continued support for the Tibetan cause. The meeting was attended by Kunga, Secretary of the Office of Tibet in London, and local Tibet supporters. Later that day, the Tibetan delegation visited Lithuania's Seimas during its political transition. They met with outgoing chair Andrius Navikas, re-elected MPs Arunas Velinkas and Matas Maltikis, and local Tibet supporters. The delegation discussed the Chinese government's repression of Tibetan religion, culture, and the forced separation of Tibetan children, urging continued international support. The visit included a trip to Tibet Square and a reception at Uzubi's Cafe with local Tibet advocates. The delegation then traveled to Riga, Latvia. On Wednesday this week, Tibetan parliamentarians continued their European outreach in Latvia, meeting with Speaker Daiga Marina and MP Juris Willums and Alexandras Christins. The delegation raised concerns about Tibet's deteriorating situation and sought continued international support. They also thanked U.S. diplomat Andrew Birley for America's long-standing support for Tibet. On November 8, the Tibet Museum of the Central Tibetan Administration opened its temporary exhibition, Rivers of the Sky, with the gracious presence of the Deputy Speaker Thomas Rintega. The exhibition highlights the critical state of Asia's rivers in Tibet under threat from climate change, environmental degradation, and water mismanagement, urging international action ahead of COP29. Tibetan environmental activist Padma Wangel, known for his 2000 tree plantation project at Tsurpu Monastery in Tibet in 2000, spoke on the impacts of resource extraction in Tibet. Padma shared his experiences of witnessing large-scale extraction of wood from the Tibetan region to profit the Chinese state-owned enterprises and private companies during the ceremony, and recalled how he received support from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Germany's Green Party in realizing his initiatives to conduct a tree plantation inside Tibet. The 10 Young Tibetan Researchers Conference hosted by the Tibet Policy Institute took place from November 9th to 11th at the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies in Varanasi. Over 30 young researchers presented their papers on Tibetan religion, history, society, environment, and the exile community, highlighting diverse aspects of Tibetan culture. In his address, Tibet Policy Institute Director Tsering emphasized the need for exiled Tibetans to engage in international discussions on Tibet, countering China's narrative on Tibetan history. Professor Lobsang Tensi Raute, representing Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies, praised the conference for exploring Tibet's past, present, and future. The event included a special session on research methods and China's use of the term Xizang for Tibet, and concluded with the tour of local historical sites. This year, the United Nations' biggest climate change conference, COP29, is being held at Baku, Azerbaijan. The Tibetan representatives Dejin Pamo and Thundu Pamo from Tibet Policy Institute are spotlighting Tibet's environmental challenges, especially the Derge Dam project's potential impact on the Dichu River. On day one, they launched a campaign with brochure titled "Say No to Derge Dam Project in Tibet," emphasizing the ecological and cultural risks to Tibet's communities. Their advocacy aims to secure international support for protecting Tibet's river and ecosystem from unsustainable hydropower development, underscoring Tibet's importance in regional water security and climate resilience. Earlier this week, Tibettv interviewed Penpa about Tibet's presence at the COP summit and their ongoing initiatives. Tune into the full conversation releasing tomorrow morning on our social media platforms. The first Asian Buddhist summit themed Role of Buddhism in Strengthening Asia took place in New Delhi from November 5th to 6th, hosted by the International Buddhist Confederation. President Draupadi Murmu inaugurated the event, where she highlighted India's commitment to interfaith dialogue, followed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama's message, which was read by Venerable Shartse Khenso Changchup Chöden, which has main message of call for unity. Mr. Tenzin Lekshe, official spokesperson and additional secretary of International Relations of Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration, delivered a presentation on Tibetan Buddhism, elaborating on its historical and spiritual significance and its continued relevance in today's world. He also discussed the teachings and global impact of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, emphasizing his messages of Buddhist values, science, and religion. Throughout the two-day event, discussions focus on Buddhism's role in promoting social harmony, ecological balance, and interfaith cooperation, with over 700 attendees, including prominent Buddhist leaders across Asia. The International Chinese Alliance for Democracy hosted a two-day seminar at the University of Sydney on November 9 to 10, where prominent Chinese democratic figures, scholars, and Taiwanese leaders examined Taiwan's democratic model as inspiration for mainland China. Moderated by Dr. Jin Jingtong, the event featured Van Den, a Tiananmen pro-democracy leader who proposed 6 strategies for strengthening the Chinese democracy movement and commended the Tibetan government in exile as a model. Tawa Sangmo of the Tibet Information Office advocated for deeper Sino-Tibetan democratic collaboration, stressing Tibet's historical independence and support for middle way policy. Other key attendees included Li Quanchen, Xi Minqing, and Shi Guangjing, who reinforced ongoing cooperation among democratic groups. That is all the news for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. Thank you so much for watching.